All right, so get a load of this, right? You guys send in this article about Fort Detrick, and it claims scientists there created, get this, human-frog hybrids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, wild, right?
Yeah,
Sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
definitely.
But it got us thinking, what is Grumbeck, the real deal with Fort Detrick and, I don't know, all this cutting-edge science, which can be kind of unsettling, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you start talking about genetic engineering.
Yeah, I mean, Fort Detrick is a place with history, right? A lot of history. And it often finds itself, I guess, at the center of a lot of the speculation. What we know for sure is it has a long history with the U.S. biological weapons program during the Cold War.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's probably like the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people, right?
Exactly. And I bet that makes some people pretty nervous, understandably.
Yeah.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity, I guess, to this whole conversation. But since then, Fort Detrick says that they've, transitioned and they're focusing on combating these biological threats like emerging diseases, bioterrorism, that kind of thing.
So, I mean, I guess that begs the question, where do we draw the line
Exactly.
with scientific exploration? I mean, when does it cross into something that's potentially dangerous research?
Right. And who makes that call?
Exactly. So, okay, on the one hand, we've got Fort Detrick, which has this history. We know they push boundaries. But on the other hand, we have this wild claim about human-frog hybrids. So I think before we dive into, like, the science fiction of it all, let's unpack what's really going on at Fort Detrick today in 2024. What kind of research are they doing there now?
So today, Fort Detrick is home to the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases.
Catchy name.
It is. We'll call it USAMRIDE for short.
Okay, good plan.
They're at the forefront of research on some of the world's deadliest diseases. We're talking Ebola, Marburg virus, anthrax.
Okay, so we're not talking about, like, the common cold here.
No. This is the kind of stuff that keeps epidemiologists up at night.
Yeah, I bet. So they're dealing with some seriously scary stuff.
Exactly.
Out of curiosity, how much of what they do is public knowledge? Is a lot of it, kind of hush-hush behind closed doors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense that there's a certain level of confidentiality,
Right.
given just the nature of the work that they're doing there. Right. But USAMRIID does publish their findings in scientific journals. They collaborate with other institutions. And I think this transparency is really crucial.
Yeah,
Especially when you're talking about potential biohazards.
for sure. So it sounds like while this human-frog hybrid story is very attention-grabbing,
Yeah.
the real story of Fort Detrick is it's a lot more nuanced than that. It's obviously a place where, I mean, they're doing groundbreaking research to protect us from some very real threats.
Right.
But it's also a place with a past
For sure.
that I think continues to spark this kind of debate and speculation.
Precisely. And it's that intersection of, we're talking cutting edge science, national security, and like we were talking about, these ethical considerations.
Right.
That, I think, makes Fort Detrick so fascinating. And I think at times a little unsettling.
Okay, so we've got a handle on kind of what Fort Detrick is really about. But what about this whole human-frog hybrid thing?
Right.
Is there any scientific basis to that claim at all?
Well,
I guess that leads us right back to this whole, human-frog hybrid thing.
Yeah.
Is there, I don't know, is there any scientific basis to that claim? Or is it just a rumor?
well, that's where, genetic engineering comes in.
Yeah.
It's a field that's, it's advancing so fast.
Right.
And with that progress, obviously, comes a lot of ethical questions, right?
Yes, for sure.
So it's, yeah.
So before we get, too deep into, like, the sci-fi aspect of it all, can we just, like, unpack what's actually possible with genetic engineering, like, right now in 2024?
Right. Yeah, we're talking about like manipulating the very building blocks of life,
Right.
which is, I don't know how else to put it. It's a huge deal.
Yeah.
But before we even like jump into the ethics of it all, I think it's important to understand the basic science behind it, right?
Absolutely. So explain it to me like I'm 5. What is genetic engineering?
Okay, so imagine DNA, your DNA is like a recipe book,
Okay.
and it's full of instructions for how to build like a human being, right?
Right.
Genetic engineering is basically like being able to go into that recipe book and just change certain ingredients.
Okay, so like if I wanted to change my eye color from brown to blue, I could just like swap out a gene for that.
I mean, it's not quite that simple, but you're getting the right idea. Like there's a lot more to it than just like swapping genes, but the basic idea is that scientists can now manipulate the genetic code in ways that were just, I mean, unimaginable a few decades ago.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So what are some of the, I don't know, the real world applications of this besides, like making glowing pigs, which is, I mean, that's a thing, right?
Yeah, no, you're referencing a real example of genetic engineering, believe it or not.
Wow.
So scientists have successfully inserted the genes for bioluminescence, like from jellyfish
Right.
into other animals.
Wow.
And it shows you how we can manipulate these genes to actually like create these brand new traits.
So it's not just a sci-fi fantasy, but I mean, what about the potential dangers of all this?
Right. So there's a lot of debate about the ethical implications of genetic engineering. And these are valid concerns, to be clear. Like, we're talking about, manipulating the very essence of life here.
Yeah.
We have to be extremely cautious about unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's not just about like playing God.
Right.
It's about like really understanding what we're doing and what the long-term effects of this kind of tinkering are going to be.
Exactly. And the ethical considerations they're complex, right? We're talking about the potential for harm. We're talking about, like you said, these unintended consequences. Do we even have the right to alter the natural world in this way?
Right.
These are questions that are being debated right now.
So I guess that brings us back to, the original question.
Yeah.
Could scientists actually create a human frog hybrid? I mean, is that even remotely possible?
So that's where things get really murky. We're not just talking about like inserting a single gene for bioluminescence, right? We're talking about combining entire genomes, which is, I mean, that's exponentially more complex. And to be clear, it's not inherently impossible.
Okay.
But it would be a massive undertaking. And it would come with these, I mean, just tremendous ethical ramifications.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's what makes this whole thing, so unsettling, right?
Right.
Even if this story about the human frog hybrid is just a rumor, it still brings up these very real questions about, like, where do we draw the line?
Absolutely.
With genetic engineering.
And it's a conversation that needs to happen, like, on a societal level, not just in a lab somewhere.
Right.
It's, we need to understand what we can do with this technology.
Right.
But also, like you said, what should we do with it? How can we use it responsibly?
It's about having those conversations now.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the potential benefits and risks of genetic engineering, but, this whole situation with Fort Detrick brings up another issue, transparency. If research like this is happening, should the public be informed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? On one hand, transparency is crucial, especially when dealing with potentially dangerous research. The public has a right to know what's going on and to have a say in how these technologies are developed and used.
But on the other hand, too much transparency could lead to panic and misinformation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with something as sensitive as genetic engineering.
Absolutely. There's a delicate balance to strike between informing the public and avoiding unnecessary fear-mongering. It's also important to remember that scientific research often involves dead ends and unexpected results. Openly sharing every single finding could create a distorted view of the science.
So how do we find that balance? Who decides what information gets shared and what doesn't?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. It requires a multifaceted approach involving scientists, policymakers, ethicists, and the public. We need open dialogue, clear communication, and robust ethical guidelines to navigate this new territory.
It sounds like we're venturing into uncharted territory, not just scientifically, but ethically and socially as well.
Precisely. This isn't just about what we can do with genetic engineering, it's about what we should do. And that's a conversation that needs to happen at all levels of society.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Fort Detrick and the world of genetic engineering, what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
The world of genetic engineering is rapidly evolving, and with it comes a responsibility to approach these advancements with a critical eye, considering both the potential benefits and the ethical implications.
It's about asking tough questions, demanding transparency, and engaging in open dialogue about the future we're creating.
Exactly, because the line between science fiction and reality is becoming increasingly blurred, and it's up to all of us to decide where we draw the line.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. As genetic engineering continues to advance, what limits, if any, do you think we should place on this technology? Food for thought.